Welcome to the Optimizing Volume Calculations in Surfer webinar. My name is Rachel Kruger. I'm a member of our support team, and I'll be showing you some ways for how to utilize Surfer to calculate volumes inside polygons, between contours, and more. After the discussion of each topic, I will stop for a few minutes to answer any questions. You can send your questions to the webinar host, which is Drew today, via the Q&A function located on the Zoom toolbar at any time. Type in your question and it will be sent to Drew, who will either answer it or forward it to me. Please use the Q&A function rather than the chat. This will allow the host to ensure we see all questions in a timely manner. Feel free to send in all of your questions. If we don't have time to answer them during the webinar, we will answer them via email once the webinar is complete. This webinar is being recorded. Later this week, we will post the recording along with the data used in the webinar to our website. We will send you a link of it when it's posted so you can test out the examples yourself. So today we're going to go through 5 examples of calculating volumes in Surfer. First, I'll cover a cut and fill analysis where we'll define an elevation value and calculate how much material would need to cut or fill to a level the grid to that value. We'll also go over creating a cut and fill map. Next, we'll walk through calculating the volume between 2 stacked surfaces or grid files. In this example, we will use the top and bottom surfaces of a particular geological horizon so we can determine the volume of that layer. Then we will build on this by next calculating volumes of intersecting surfaces, in this example determining the change in ground morphology between the surface of Kilauea in 2009 and the surface again in 2018 after a large eruption. The next example is calculating the volume within a specific area and specific boundary polygons. In this case, we'll use the boundary of the Colorado River at its intersection with the Blue River in Kremling, Colorado, to calculate the volume of the river. This example will also include discussing calculating volume within 1 or more 3D polygons. And then lastly, we will cover how to calculate volume and area between contours. All right, I hope that was enough to get everyone excited. Let's begin with our cut and fill analysis. So our first example will use one surface or grid file and a horizontal plane. In this case, we will specify an elevation of a particular level and calculate how much material is above that elevation that would need to be cut or removed, and how much material would need to be filled or added to the areas below that level. So to start, we're going to take a look at a contour map and a 3D surface map that were created from the same grid file. So this just gives 2 different perspectives of the same data. For this particular data set, our Z range is about 2,900 meters to 3,800 meters. Let's say we're doing construction and we'd like to level out this entire area at a Z value of 3,200 meters. To do this, I need to know how much material would be removed or added. So we can begin by clicking the Grids tab, Calculate, Volume. This opens the grid volume dialog where you can define your upper surface and lower surface of your volume calculation. The upper surface in this instance is our grid file. And so you can click the drop-down menu where it says None if you've already loaded your grid files into your map. Since we've done this, we can choose either grid as they are the same data in the same grid. Okay. If you hadn't loaded these in, you could also click Browse and browse to your surface file or grid file. Okay. And in this example, our lower surface is going to be the constant Z of 3,200, because this is what we want to level to, so flatten or add material to. You'll also notice that under Options, we have a Z scale factor. The Z-scale factor allows you to convert the Z units of the grids by using a multiplier. The volume results are reported in units of x times y times z. So you want the xyz units in the grids to all be the same units. I know my xyz units here are all in meters, so I'll leave this set to 1. But if, for example, my z units were in feet, I could enter 0.3048 here to convert the z units from feet to meters so that the xyz units match and the volume results would be accurately reported in meters cubed. So for this, I'll go ahead and click OK. This generates the grid volume report. Let's take a quick look at this volume report. So the top portion gives you information about the selected upper and lower surfaces. As you can see here, we have all of the grid information for our upper surface, including the grid file name and your X, Y, Z mins and maximums and X and Y spacing. For our lower surface, we just have a planar Z defined by the 3200 amount. If we chose for our lower surface to be another grid, you would have all of the same information for your lower surface grid in this section. So underneath the upper surface and lower surface sections, we have our volumes section. In volumes, we have total volumes by and cut and fill volumes. Our total volumes by section reports the volume calculation results of 3 different equations: the trapezoidal rule, Simpson's rule, Simpson's 3/8 rule. The equations and references for these methods are described in the help, and we recommend reviewing this if you would like further information on these methods. And you can do so by clicking the help in the app by going home and then help, or going online to surferhelp.goldensoftware.com. Okay. Underneath the total volumes by are our cut and fill volumes. This is what we're interested in for this example. The positive volume, or cut, is where the upper surface is above the lower surface. So in this case, our grid is above our value of 3,200 meters. This is the amount of material we'd need to remove, so about 61 billion meters cubed, or 61 cubic kilometers. The negative volume, or fill, is the amount of material we'd need to have to fill the area up to level the entire area to the value of 3,200 meters, or our lower surface. So this is about 42 billion cubic meters. The net volume reports the difference between the cut and fill volumes. So this tells me I have about 19 billion cubic meters of additional positive volume or additional materials left over after leveling. And then the last thing I wanted to show you in our grid volume report is that it also produces areas, including planar areas and surface areas. Okay, so from the volume report, you can save the report by clicking File, Save, or Save As. For our purposes, I'm just going to exit out, and I'm not going to save my changes, so I'll click No here. Now, if I wanted to visualize the cut and fill on my map, I could simply select my contour map in the map, the contents window, or on the map, go to the Levels tab of my Properties windows, and adjust my levels by adjusting the fill colors to only show 2 colors, what's going to be filled and what's going to be cut. And I can do this by clicking this ellipses here to open the custom color map. For our example, we just want a 2-toned color map, so I'm going to choose this bright blue to red color map, and I'll add in some nodes by double-clicking on my line. To make these colors more discrete, I will pick our values of 3,200 and then 100.1, and I'll adjust these colors to just be blue and red. Bye. And we have a cut and fill color map. So here you can see The red is everything that would need to be cut, and the blue is everything that would need to be filled. If you wanted even better visualization, you could overlay your contour map with your 3D surface. And of course, you can adjust the lighting a little bit, but you can see what would need to be cut and what would need to be filled from here. So, are there any questions about calculating the cut and fill volumes before I move on to the next example? So one question, is there a way to include the measurement units in the volume report? Not currently at this time. They're reported in whichever units you have in your map, but that is a great feature request, and we will add that to our suggestion file. So another question, you said all my data needs to be in the same unit, but what if my data is in lat long? Great question. In this case, I would recommend using the grids edit convert command. So grids edit convert to convert to UTM or another coordinate system that doesn't use decimal degrees. Doing this will create a new grid, and it won't affect the original grid that you might be using for modeling or other mapping. Okay, we're going to move on to our second example then. So for this example, I'm going to go through calculating the volume between two grid files. Let's say I have two grid files, one for the current top of a particular horizon and one for the bottom, and we want to find the volume of material of the horizon layer itself. So in this example, we want to know the volume between these two layers. This method could be used to calculate the volume of a coal seam, the amount of overburden material, volume of any given geologic layer, groundwater storage surfaces, anything like that. This workflow will be really helpful to you. So I have these two gridded horizons here, which have already been overlaid. And like I said, we're interested in the volume between these two. And I can highlight that really quickly by just going to General, the General tab, my Properties window, and then checking Show Base of both of these. And I'm just going to highlight the one that we're interested in this orange color. So this is the volume that we'll be calculating. Okay, so from here, I can click again on grids calculate volume. And in this example, our upper surface is going to be our top grid, and our lower surface is going to be our bottom grid. So in our last example, we were doing a constant Z. Again, if you were doing a lot of these and you didn't want to open your grids in the map dialog first, you could browse to your data and calculate the volumes with the data file by browsing. Clicking browse does not open the data files in your map. It just generates the volume report. Okay, and I know that all of my values are in meters here, so I'll leave this z-scale factor again as 1. So I'll click OK, and another volume report is generated. So similar to last time, we have our upper surface and lower surface, but you can see that we have all the grid data for the lower surface, whereas last time we just defined that planar Z. You can see which grids went for your upper surface and your lower surface, and all of their X, Y, Z minimums, maximums, and spacing. So you can come down to the volume section, and you can see we have a total volume of 2,925 cubic meters between these two geologic layers. I do want to point out that we don't have any negative volume or fill, and we do not have any negative planar areas as well. This is because the grid surfaces are more or less parallel, or at least not intersecting. So this is what we would expect. Our upper grid always being above our lower grid. Okay, exit out of this. And do we have any questions about calculating volume between two stacked surfaces before I move on to two intersecting surfaces? So one question, what equation is being used to show the figure? This is not related to any equation. We're just showing the base, filling in the area, or the area and the volume between this surface and the bottom surface, again, with the general base show base option. So this isn't showing a particular calculation like trapezoidal or Simpson's rule or anything like that. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and go through an example where these surfaces intersect. This example was obviously nice and easy to non-intersecting grids. Grids also of the exact same size with the same XY extents and nodes. With older versions of Surfer, or this is kind of a perfect scenario, but real life is often not perfect. And with older versions of Surfer, the calculate volume command performed its operations on a node-by-node basis, and it did require that two grids have the exact same number of rows and columns and the exact same XY limits. These days, though, and since we have hosted a optimizing volumes webinar, Surfer can calculate volumes and also perform grid math on grids of different sizes. So we'll explore this with some gridded LiDAR data for our third example. And in this example, we're in Hawaii. Our top surface is the Kilauea volcano in 2009, which is over here on the right. And our lower surface will be the same area, slightly larger area in 2018 after the large 2018 eruption. The grids are open here, but if you were to create these contour maps by going Home, New Map, Contour, you could easily compare the grid info and the spatial extents of these two grids. So I'm just going to toggle now between the 2009 grid and the 2018 grid, and we're going to focus on this grid info down here, looking at our X and Y mins and maxes. So as I toggle between 2009 and 2018, we can see that those X min, X max, Y min, Y max are in fact different for both grids. So like I said, in older versions of Surfer, this would have been an issue, and we'd have to perform a workaround about assigning node data and resizing these grids in order to perform our volume calculations. This is not necessary anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. You can also see, just when you're looking at these two contour maps, that they do in fact have different spatial extents in their X and Y. Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. So we can go ahead and calculate the volume to see the change in ground morphology between 2009 and 2018. To start this, I would actually recommend overlaying these maps and then viewing them in the 3D view. So I'm just going to drag my 2018 contour underneath my 2009. And because these had different spatial extents, you'll get the warning, do you want to adjust the map limits to include all the data from this layer? For now I do, so I'm going to click yes. Okay. And then I'm going to change the color of the 2009 grid just so we can differentiate between these two a little bit better. Oop. There we go. Okay, to view these in the 3D view, you just want to click on your map object in the contents window, and then the view tab of your properties window, click on 3D view. And here we have a 3D view of our contoured Kilauea data. And we can see as I toggle between 2009, I turn it on and off, you can see that the crater has indeed moved and changed shape and size. This is a great way to visualize what you might expect from your volume calculations before you perform them. But I'm going to exit out of the 3D view for now, and we can continue with performing these calculations. Okay, so to do so, you just go back to grids, calculate volume, and in this case, our upper surface will be 2009, and our lower surface will be 2018. And when you're calculating volume of grids with different spatial extents, different XYs, you want to make sure that the align grids using option is set to XY coordinates. So in this case, that was the default. You also have the option to align grids using your node position. Again, this requires that you have the same spatial extents though. So we're going to choose XY coordinates. The master grid for geometry option, this will choose what you want to, which grid you want to use for your geometry. So since the 2009 grid is smaller, I'm going to go ahead and use the upper surface or the 2009 grid as my master grid for the geometry. Okay, from here you can click OK, and a volume report is generated. And when we scroll down to the volume, you can see that there has, in fact, been volume added and taken away since the eruption, which makes sense because we're having the morphology change in different parts of this volcano. In some areas, things would be added from the eruption, and in other areas, things would be taken away. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this volume report. And do we have any questions about calculating the volume between two intersecting grid files or two grid files of different sizes before I continue on? So we do have a question, where did we get the data? So the majority of the data you're seeing today was actually downloaded from opentopography.org. It's a great site. It is free, but you will need to make an account if you want to download larger data sets or really large data sets. Okay. So with that, we're going to move on to our fourth example. And we're going to calculate volume within polygons and boundary polygons. So for this example, we have an entire surface of the confluence of the Colorado River and the Blue River in Kremlin, Colorado. This 3D surface was created with LiDAR data. It's already been gridded in Surfer, and I created a custom color map to highlight the areas of land versus the river extent. So in this example, we're going to look at finding the volume of the river. And to do this, I'll need to create a boundary for my polygon. There are a couple options here. You could obviously choose to draw, add a base map with no data, draw a polygon around the extent of your river, but this can be tedious and time consuming, and I know that no one wants to see me do that on the webinar. So actually a simpler way of doing it, and especially for this example, would be to pinpoint the contour line that marks the extent of the river and to export those contours. So we can do this easily by opening this up as a contour map. So I'm going to go Home, New Map, Contour, and I'm going to select my Kremlin grid, which covers this area. I'll click Open. So give me 1 second to just format these a little bit nicer, ways that we can view. I'm going to remove the fill on the contour map. Okay, so it looks like this contour is the extent of our river. And the easiest way to see that and to get the elevation data for that is you can add some contour labels here. So we can do that by going to Map Tools, Edit Layer, Contour Labels. And what this allows us to do is move any contour labels that were already present on the map. We can also add contour labels by holding down the Control button on your keyboard and clicking along your contour layer or level. So it looks like the contour that we're most interested in will be this 2,240 meter contour. To export just this contour out, all we need to do is adjust our levels of our contour map. So making sure we can turn off the contour labels option in the edit layer, make sure your contour layer is selected, and then in the levels tab, we're going to adjust the minimum and maximum contour level to be the contour of interest. So 2240. And this will, of course, get rid of our custom labels, but that's fine. And then adjusting the maximum contour again to 2,240 meters. So we're left with just the one contour that we care about. Okay. To make sure that this makes sense with our 3D surface map, we can go ahead and overlay the contour map with the 3D surface map. And then I'm going to highlight the location by changing the line properties to red and then adding some width. Okay. So as we can see here, that looks like it outlines everything that we'll be interested in for our volume calculation. So the easiest way to export this contour as a polygon is to use the Map Tools, Layer Tools, Export Contours command. So I'll click on that. And you can label, you can assign a file name here. We have a few different save as types for files. We have DXF and then a 2D as reshaped file, 3D as reshaped file, and a text file. For the purpose of this example, I'm going to keep with the DXF. So give me just a couple of moments to name this and save. Okay, now we can bring this back into the map by clicking on the map object and then right-clicking, add to map, base, and selecting the DXF that we just created. For our purposes, the DXF import options, all of the defaults are fine. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, and our DXF was imported. And to see how it lines up, we can turn off our contour layers, and then we can adjust the line properties of our DXF similar to how we did for our contour layer. So I'm going to make these red again, and then add some thickness. And that is exactly what we want. So now that we have polygons that define the extent of the river, I can continue with my volume calculations. So back to our grids tab, calculate volume. So our upper surface here is going to be our Kremlin grid. And again, you can pick either of these because they're the same grid file. And give me 1 minute. Okay. So what we want for our lower surface is actually the lower extent of our river. So to get the lower extent of our grid file, I'm actually going to exit out of this and click on either layer that has the grid open. And in the general tab of the properties window, I'm going to click the grid info dialog or button, which opens the grid information file. And here I can come down to the Z column and find my minimum Z is 2,230 And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this number, just using Control-C on my keyboard, and then go back into the grid's calculate volume command. Again, selecting that grid as my upper surface, and my lower surface is going to be my constant Z that I just copied and pasted over from the grid info dialog. So the only thing different so far from in the grid volume dialog that we haven't dealt with is the boundary polygon. Again, since we already have the DXF in our map layer, we can go ahead and select it from the drop-down menu. If you didn't want to add it to your map, again, you can just click Browse and locate the DXF or the boundary file that you'd like to use. Once we select a boundary file, we have a couple more options. So do you want to calculate the volume inside of your polygon or outside? In this case, we want to look at the volume inside. And then we have two other options, selected objects only and combine all polygons. I'll go over these in a couple minutes, but for now, I'll just click OK. Okay, so this gives us the volume of the river. Again, since our upper surface is always above that bottom surface in this example, we have only positive volumes. And it looks like our river is, we have just over 9 billion cubic meters of volume running through this area of the confluence between the Colorado River and the Blue River near Kremling. Okay, so I'm back out of this. So now let's say we only wanted the volume for one of the polygons in this layer. Say we had a lot of these little polygons that came up kind of as islands when we were dealing with our contour maps and we wanted to exclude those. We could extend our DXF by clicking the plus sign and then picking whichever polygon of interest that you'd like. For now, I'm just going to select a random polygon, and to perform the volume calculation on this, you just do calculate volume. You pick your upper surface as the grid. Our lower surface remains the same. Surfer remembers the constant Z that you input previously, so we don't have to adjust that this time. And then we will also assign our boundary polygon. We're still interested in the volume inside, but in this case, we are going to make sure selected objects only is selected. And since we only have the one polygon, we don't have an option to combine all polygons. The selected objects only selection will only make sure that the volumes are calculated for whatever is selected actively, which is this third polygon. So from here, I can click OK. Another grid report is generated. And we have reports for the polygons. We have this new area, polygon boundaries. It's telling you where your polygon file is from, the number of polygons that were used to calculate, and if it was inside or the volume calculation was inside or outside of this polygon. So here we have reports for the total volumes, cut and fill, as well as your individual polygon areas. And you can notice that these volumes are a lot smaller than the 9 billion cubic meter volume of the entire river. Okay, say you wanted though to calculate the volume for a number of polygons. So maybe you wanted a range of these. You could hold down your shift button and select all the polygons in a range, or you can hold down Control and you can select random polygons. They probably wouldn't be random to you, but you can select individual polygons at a time doing that as well. To calculate the volumes of these polygons, it's the same function, grids calculate volume. You'll set your upper surface and keep your lower surface as the constant Z, set your boundary polygon, and you can choose selected objects only. And this is where the combine all polygons is important. If you would like individual reports of the areas of these different polygons, you can leave this unselected. So I'll do that now. Oop, And the report took just a second longer to calculate because it is parsing out the volumes of each individual polygon that you created. And of course, you can rename these polygons under your DXF file, not in the grid report or the volume report, but you'd rename them before, and then you could see the actual names of your polygons in your polygon ID. So I'll run through that calculation really quickly again, assigning my upper surface and my polygon boundary. We're going to keep just the selected objects, but this time we're going to combine all polygons. And click OK. And now we have a report that looks very similar to our last few examples where everything is combined, and we have the sum of the volumes and the sum of the areas for all of these polygons. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to touch on for this example is that, and you've probably already noticed this, but our DXF, when we brought in our DXF from our contour line, Surfer automatically recognized the polygons in the DXF as 3D polygons since we exported them with that contour value and that Z information. So that is brought into Surfer. And obviously, we've been performing this, but Surfer has no problem calculating the area of a 3D polygon. Again, if we were to just calculate the volume of this individual or this single 3D polygon, we'll go through the steps like we've been doing, but just the selected objects only. We'll pull this open. You get the same grid report. This can also be done with 2D polygons if you prefer to work with 2D polygons or you don't have that Z data. Okay, so before continuing on to our final example, do we have any other questions? So question, reports can be exported, I assume, and in what formats? So to export a grid volume report, I'm just going to make the grid volume here again, grid volume report here again. So you can choose to save or save as. You can also print. So running through save as, you have the option to print as a text file or the rich text format, RTF. Let's see, and if you decide to print, you can print to PDF as well. Okay, so another question. Is there a difference between using the export contours command and the regular export? So yes, so when we exported our contours, there are a few differences and reasons why I decided to export contours. The first is that the export contours command ignores all other layers and objects when exporting and only exports that contour layer that we saw when we pulled in. So when you use export contours, you don't have to toggle the visibility of any additional layers on and off. So you don't have to delete, your right, left, bottom, top axis when you pull it in. You just are left with the contour, that specific contour level as your polygons. If you did, though, want to export to another format that's not a DXF or shapefile or a text file, then you would need to use the normal file export command. Okay, so we can move on to our final example of the day. So for this example, we're going to calculate the volume between contours. So calculating the volume and area between contours is possible with this handy command, again, under grids, calculate contour, volume, and area. First, let's figure out which contours we want to use this command for. This is a contour map of Indianapolis, Indiana, and let's say I want to calculate the volume between this 274 major contour and 278 for this example. From here, I can go to Grids, Calculate, Contour Volume, and Area. This pulls up the Contour Volume and Area dialog. You'll need to add your input grid, which is our Indianapolis grid, but we don't have an upper and lower surface because we're only dealing with the one grid and the contour layers of that grid. The minimum contour, maximum contour, and contour intervals, these will be filled out with what is present in your map. So this is the lower extent currently and upper extent of our data, and then the contour interval was set to 2 in our map object. You can, of course, use Browse to select your grid, and if you were to do that and open, and you didn't have it open in the map object, these would be set to the default minimum, maximum, and default contour interval as Surfer has defined. So, like I said, for this example, we're going to look at 274 meter to the 278 meter contour. I'm going to change the contour interval to 1. And what this does is it will show us the volumes calculated between each interval versus every other interval, which 2 would have done. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But from here, you can click OK. And a grid contour volume and area report is generated. So you can see again your grid file name and what you input in the grid contour volume area dialog. And what we have here is the area above, below, and between each of the contours, and the volume above, below, and between the contours. So if you, let's see, you'll have these NAs when you don't have a contour, above the next one. So 278 is our last contour. There's nothing in between 278 and what we have above. So in your planar area, surface area, and volumes, you'll see this non-applicable. Okay. So let's say I wanted to see the difference between these at a different contour interval. I'm going to exit out here. I'll run through the same functions, so grids, calculate, contour volume and area, choosing my input grid, and adjusting my minimum and maximum contour. Okay. And then I'll keep the contour interval at 2. Last time we changed it to 1, and we can see the differences there in our new volume and area report. So as you can see, it just calculates the area above, below, between, and the volume above, below, and between contours in intervals of 2. So this is including, this volume calculation is including all of the volume at the 275 interval and the 278 interval in these values for area and for volume. Okay, and then similar to the grid volume report, you can save these. File save or save as, and you have the same options, .rft or txt, and then you can print and print to PDF if you wish. Okay. So do we have any questions about calculating volume between contours? Okay, if not, oh wait, so can we do this with automation? So I assume calculating volume between contours and automation. Yes, and we have an article on our website in the Surfer support section of our website. We have several articles with how you can calculate volumes, save out grid files, things of that nature with using Scripter and Surfer together. So if you have a lot of grid calculations you're running through, you can use Scripter to automate that process and save your grid file reports. So then I can just take questions for the entire webinar. Let's see. So one question, I may have missed it in the kiloway example, but how does Surfer handle the calculations where the grid does not overlap? So that is where if a node is assigned no data, Surfer will ignore that node and not calculate the volume there. And then calculating the volumes themselves is interpolating between node to node. So if it skips over a node and you don't have a node in that area, then the volume will not be calculated on that specific node. If you have a contour map or a grid that is smaller, in our kiloway example, I can go back to it. The 2009 grid was smaller than the 2018 grid. We chose the maximum, I can run through that again really quick, calculate volume. Just do, oops. We chose the upper surface as our master grid for geometry. This will clip any volume calculations to the extent of that upper surface. So it won't take into account, Surfer will ignore everything that's outside of the geometry for the upper surface or the 2009 grid. So another question for calculating volumes between contours. So the question is, let's see, on calculating volumes between contours, how do you zone in to one area in your map to calculate? So, and you can let me know if I'm wrong, but I assume you mean maybe calculate within a given polygon, which is not currently possible for calculating in between contour volumes and areas, but that is a great feature request. So you really are just calculating between the entire 274 contour, between the entire 278 contour. You'll receive the volume in between those contours in all parts of your map. Okay, well, that does conclude my presentation on calculating volumes in Surfer. I would like to thank everyone for their time and for coming to the webinar. I'll stick around for a few more minutes to answer any questions that do come in, but of course you can sit on this, and if you think of any questions that come up, please don't hesitate to email us at surfersupport@goldensoftware.com or at support@goldensoftware.com. And again, a recording of this webinar will be posted shortly later this week at our website at goldensoftware.com. Thanks again for your time, and I'll stick around for a few more minutes in case we have any other questions.